systems and creating a frustrating element of uncertainty and exasperation across many countries. From FATCA to the OECD Global Tax Transparency Regulation Initiatives, to the Financial Stability Board FSB's guidance notes, to corresponding banking and the prodigious de-risking elements, global tax and financial regulators in certain industrialized countries, as we heard, are seemingly and perhaps unwittingly creating a process that not only challenges our claim to national sovereignty, but in very real ways threatens the socio-economic progress and future of many of our countries. It is therefore quite appropriate that at specific junctures such as this, policymakers and tax practitioners across similar jurisdictions as ours find some time to consult and collaborate among and between ourselves to raise the level of understanding of the new phenomena that we face and to plan appropriate responses for such. I therefore view this conference as a critical part of the ongoing process to improve not only the way in which we structure and administer our taxes, but how together we seek to insert our voice in how the international discourse on the process of tax compliance, tax regulation, and tax transparency is shaped. This is particularly the case since most, if not all, of our members, that is CATA members, are indeed members of or affected by such processes as the Global Forum, and certainly by the issues which they portend in one fashion or another. In this regard, it would be remiss of me if I did not place on the public record this government's uneasiness and in some instances dissatisfaction with both the tenor and the process which has emerged internationally for handling matters pertaining to tax administration, regulation, and compliance. I can say up front that Barbados' record of cooperation with international processes for tax compliance and regulation, and indeed transparency, has been exemplary. I certainly do believe that by and large, for most of our regional colleagues as our sister countries in the region, the same can be said as well. It is true that while levels of engagement and intervention may differ across jurisdictions, this is more to do with the asymmetries that exist across countries relative to the human resource and financial capacities than it does to do with the willingness of governments to cooperate and to lead in these matters. Over the past 15 years or so, we have upgraded both our legislative and administrative functions, not just in an effort to comply with new and evolving norms of tax regulation and transparency, but essentially to build a far more efficient and proficient tax administration system in the country. I am confident that we have or are well on our way to achieving both of these objectives. Many of you will be very familiar with the forceful pushback which we, this is Barbados, showed relative to the early inclusions of the OECD harmful tax practices matter through the very complicated and in many respects expansive extrajuridical intervention of the US-driven FATCA law and our successful efforts to become compliant with its demands, while now fighting the potentially debilitating corresponding banking / de-risking issues as they emerge. In all respects, Barbados has modernized its legislation, upgraded its policy framework, and broadened its network of partners across the world in terms of countries and tax administrations to ensure that we just not secure only our national space, but build firewalls against tax avoidance, money laundering, the financing of terrorism, and other illicit activities. Such has been our progress in this regard, that not only have we assumed a central role in both the OECD and FSB processes, but just as recent as September, the OECD upgraded our status to largely comply with the requirements of the OECD Global Forum on Tax Transparency and Exchange of Information for tax purposes. Indeed, further to this, we are one of the few jurisdictions across the developing world to have successfully completed 2 full FSAP reviews, financial sector assessment reviews, and are poised to undergo a third one very soon. All of these processes and advancements have aided us in building an international tax jurisdiction that we believe is stable, transparent, and particularly cooperative with international norms. And this has been good for us, as it has been for other countries in our region that have followed similar routes, in that it has allowed us to continue to operate with a relatively viable international business and financial services sector. I am aware that recent conversations in the media, that is the local media, and elsewhere, have centered around the quote-unquote discovery in the Article 4 consultation report of the International Monetary Fund, that over the past few years, Barbados has lost as much as $200 million in tax revenue per year from the operations of our international business and financial services sector, as a conflation of challenges and policy changes in some of our key source markets for this sector have driven down business opportunities for the country. Of course, for those of us who have cared to pay attention to many of the speeches and papers which were delivered or penned by both policymakers or tax practitioners such as your local colleagues, and Ms. Savers in particular, that observation would not have come as any surprise to those in Barbados. Indeed, in 2014, during an estimates presentation in the Honorable House of Assembly in Barbados, I was at pains to point out that Barbadians, that stemming from the time of the 2008 fallout from the worst financial crisis in the postmodern globalization era, through the major adjustments to the Canadian domestic financial legislation, Barbados' economy had lost more than $1 billion in tax revenue over a 5-year period. Revenues that previously were used by successive governments to improve and maintain infrastructure, support major social investments in health, education, public transport, and national security, as well as to give generous tax cuts to a growing middle class, while removing several among the working poor from the tax rolls. So that when we come to engage the very important, as Mr. Lam has said, discourse about debt deficits, revenue and expenditure, we need to do so from an informed perspective where we come into contact with the sobering reality that for small, resource-constrained and highly vulnerable economies such as ours, adjusting to such massive loss of revenue, massive losses of revenue capacity, will neither easy nor realistic. It is for this reason that government has been pursuing a concerted program of fiscal consolidation to bring its revenues and expenditures more in alignment, and of tax and financial administrative reform across the public services of the country. Ladies and gentlemen, both of these processes are in advanced stages of implementation, I'm happy to report, all with varying degrees of progress and success. And while I will not attempt to prosecute that case on this occasion, except to say that amidst all the noise and chatter, we need to come up with comprehensive plans to ensure that we continue that progress. What I would like to say is that it is important for tax administrators to take it absolutely critical, the seminal function of advising governments on most of the efficient and equitable ways to devise, impose, collect, and of course ensure compliance for national taxes. It is a function which, if executed under the right, or I should say correct circumstances, and those sometimes and always shall be, as Ms. Sivers, the Revenue Commissioner, will remind me, with access to appropriate levels of human, administrative, and financial capacity, can assist in making the attainment of national, economic, and social objectives that much easier. It is for this reason, inter alia, that our government has seen it fit over the past 8 years to make fundamental changes to the apparatus of its financial management and regulatory systems in general and its tax administration specifically.